Today is a very special day in our diocese because Bishop Hicks has instructed all the priests in our diocese to preach about his pastoral letter, his plan for evangelization in our church. And I feel like last weekend I already gave you guys a really good sneak preview into that plan, and we talked about sort of some of the models that he used in that plan. So I will be referencing those again this weekend. However, I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a different stab at this letter. It was written in such a very personal way. You can tell that the bishop really put his heart into this letter and his own personal faith into this letter. And so I kind of want to approach his letter with my own story, my own witness story. And so I begin this homily today the same way Bishop Hicks started his letter. I love Jesus. I deeply love Jesus. And I have been in love with Jesus since my early 20s. That's where my story really began. I suppose I could go back further. I could go back to, when I was baptized or growing up in Catholic schools. All of that was important and very formative in my early life. But the moment that I truly and deeply felt that I could say that I love Jesus came at the age of 21. And when I was 21, I was in college. I had been away from the church for many years. In fact, my entire family left the church right after I was confirmed. When I was confirmed, we were one of those statistical Catholics that just sort of split. And so throughout my high school years, I really wasn't practicing any kind of a faith. When I was in college, though, after a few years of being in college, I was challenged by a group of young people my own age who loved Jesus. And they approached me one day. One of them, it was like the beginning of a school semester, and I was walking down the hall, and there were all these different tables from different organizations there that were giving out their literature and trying to get you to become part of their program. And there was one table that they were handing out candy. And here's this person handing out candy to me. I very happily took the bag of candy. And the woman who gave me the bag of candy looked at me and she goes, "Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ?" I remember kind of standing back with my candy going, I just wanted a bag of candy. So I took my candy and I left. And as I was walking down the hall with my candy, it occurred to me that she asked me a pretty deep question there. And I didn't have a real answer for her. In my head, I did not have a real answer for her. Do I have a relationship with Jesus Christ? I've been taught a lot of things about Jesus Christ. I certainly have, had all of my sacraments of initiation in the Catholic Church, but did I have a relationship with, I hadn't even darkened the doorstep of a church in over 5 years at that point. 6 years. And it bothered me that I did not have an answer to that question. It bothered me that I did not have a genuine answer to my question about, her question about God. How does God fit into my life? And so over the next several weeks, I found myself trying to answer that question. I talked to professors. I talked to a philosophy professor who actually gave me a Bible. My philosophy professor actually gave me a Bible. And eventually I started going to those meetings that they were trying to get me to come to at that table. And it was a group of young people, college-aged people, who would come together once a week at the college, and they would worship together, and they would have talks, guest speakers, people giving their witness story about why they love Jesus. And after exploring this and reading that Bible that my professor had given to me, after a few weeks, I sat down with one of those peers who had become my friend during that time, and I made a statement of faith, a confession of faith. And I said, yes, I do believe in Jesus. I do believe that He is God. I do believe that He has a big place in my life. I went through a conversion. Bishop Hicks' first step in his model of evangelization, there are 4 C's, if you remember. I talked about them last week if you were here. If not, I'm going to go over them again. The first one is conversion. We should be able to look at a point in our life where we have a conversion moment. It is the moment when you can honestly say the same words that Bishop Hicks says, I love Jesus. And if you haven't said those yet, you might have not had your conversion yet. That's okay, even though you've been here for many years. Remember, I'd gone through all my sacraments. My conversion came long after that. I love Jesus. It's that moment where you realize that there is an important relationship that you need to have with your Creator. That is conversion. His next C, his next category, Bishop Hicks talks about, is called confession. And I'm going to talk about it kind of in 2 ways, because really what I did was I made a confession of faith. In fact, I remember my friend, he had me pull out the Bible that my professor had given to me. And in that particular Bible, there was even a page at the very front of the Bible where there was a prayer that sometimes evangelicals will use this prayer. They call it the sinner's prayer. And it was just a simple way to acknowledge that you have invited Jesus into your life. And then there was a little line to sign my name at the bottom. And I did that. I prayed that prayer, signed my name at the bottom of this. It felt, for me, that signing of that felt official. Like I've just made this very official today. I actually put my signature to this confession of faith that I've just made. And we do make a confession of faith, by the way. We do it at every Mass. It's called our creed. So we do have a confession of faith that we make together every week. The other part of confession, of course, is we confess our faith, but we also confess our sins. We face our own humanity. In that process of developing a relationship with God, you must at some point come to grips with your own humanity, your own propensity to make mistakes and mess up and do things that are unkind and hopefully want to make a change in your life. Conversion leads to a desire to be different, to be better, to try to live up to the very best version of yourself that God created you to be. And so that conversion in your heart, which might sort of seem and begin like a very emotional kind of a thing, begins to develop into a very intentional thing, because now I'm working at my life. I'm claiming my beliefs. I'm professing them, I'm confessing them, and I'm confessing my sins while I'm at it. I'm trying to become better. I'm trying to live better. So what happened in my life at that time was, of course, after I made this dramatic confession of faith, and I had this conversion and this confession of faith, and began to think more deeply about myself, I was challenged again by some of those same people who had asked me that question, do you have a relationship with Jesus? Now they're asking me another question. Do you go to church? Do you go to church? Are you going to pick a church? Are you going to go to a church? And I'm like, well, I come and meet with you guys once a week and we do prayer together, and that kind of feels like church to me. And my friend Jeff looked at me right in the face. He says, what we do together once a week is beautiful, but it's not church. You need to go to church. And so I started going to all sorts of churches. I was flipping around back then we had a thing called the telephone book. Now we just have the internet. And I'm going to all these different places, and I'm like, I don't even know what feels right. And finally, I talked to my parents about it. I came home and I told them what had happened in my life. Again, making that confession again, because now I'm telling people. Now I'm beginning to tell people what's happening to me. That's a confession of faith. And so I go and I tell my parents that, I've had this dramatic sort of epiphany in my life, and I've invited Jesus to be part of my life, and my friends are telling me I need to go to church. Well, keep in mind, when I left the Catholic Church years ago, my parents left with me. And my dad looked up at me and he goes, well, why don't we just go back to Mass? Just like that. That's what it took to get my parents to go to Mass. I just had to decide that I needed to go. And suddenly my parents were all in. It's amazing the train ride you can take people on when you go through your own conversion. You might just have a few people tag along with you. And so there we were as a family, my mom, my dad, myself, and we did the same thing. We church hopped the Catholic churches until we found our home at St. Margaret Mary in Naperville. And we started going there every week. And my dad developed this friendship with Father Rick, who was the associate there at the time. And it seemed right. It was comfortable. It was home. It was community. And for the first time in years, I went back to the sacraments and began to receive communion again. This is the third C, by the way, for Bishop Hicks, is communion. When you've had conversion in your heart, when you have confessed your faith, and when you begin to sort of struggle with your own humanity, there's this deep desire for more. To have a deeper relationship with God, but also to have a deep relationship with other Christians, with other people who are celebrating these same things. When we come and we receive communion, yes, we're receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, but we are also, as the church often calls it, in communion with the whole church. All the angels, all the saints, all the churches from around the world. A priest pointed something out to me at one of those early masses that I returned back to. He says, this is how beautiful the Mass is. The Mass is never ceasing. If you think about it, we are a world, a globe that is divided up in all of these different time zones around the world. And so if you think about it, there is a mass being said every moment of every day. It is unceasing. It never ends. It never stops. The church is always praying. Always. Always. That's maybe the deepest level of communion that I can think of, is that here we are, we've invited Jesus into our lives, in our hearts, we receive him, and at the same time, we are in communion with all of our brothers and sisters in Christ. Which leads us to the fourth C in Bishop Hicks's sort of design of evangelization. And it's not really a design. He's just describing something that God created. You know, our bishop is a smart man. He didn't have to reinvent the wheel. He's just pointing out the wheel. And so we have this wonderful thing that we call commission. So what naturally happens then, after you've been converted of your heart, you begin to face your own humanity, you develop a deep communion with other believers. At that point, you begin to realize, this is so important to me that it bothers me that other people are not experiencing this. Jesus, send me. Send me. Let me bring some more people to this experience that I've had. It's made such a difference in my life. It bothers me. I hope it bothers you that other people don't have that yet. Because when it bothers you, at that point, you make a decision. I want to do something about it. His entire pastoral letter is called make. And it's a verb that comes out of the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to follow me. We have to go and make disciples. It's our commission. It's ultimately what this entire thing leads to. And there has to be something that sustains this process of conversion and confession and communion and commission. And Bishop Hicks describes it very simply. It's our prayer life. At the very center of all of this, while it's all happening in our lives, is our prayer life. And that made a lot of sense to me, because every one of these steps I made was accompanied by prayer. It was accompanied by prayer. I could not have made a conversion if I didn't at least dare to pray and try it. I remember out of frustration at that initial conversion of mine, I was sitting in my bedroom at home, pondering over things people have told me, and finally I tossed it all to the side, and I just said, okay, God, I'm going to do something I haven't tried in 6 years. I'm going to pray. I'm going to talk to you. And I'm going to talk to you, and I'm not even sure if you exist yet, but I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to hope that you listen and give me some wisdom in this and give me some direction in this. And it actually worked. It actually worked. I prayed, and within a week, I was sitting there with my friend Jeff, making my confession of faith, believing in Jesus, accepting him into my life. And what I have found, and Bishop Hicks talks about this in his letter too, is this process, these 4 C's and prayer in the center of all of them, is something that happens throughout our lives. It doesn't just happen one time. I can look to other moments in my life where I experience conversion. Maybe not on the same dramatic level that I did in my 20s, but continually drawing me closer to God through this process. I can think about going to the seminary. When I began to think about priesthood, I go to the seminary, renewing my relationship with God at the seminary, discovering new things about my faith, deepening my confession of faith, deepening my examination of my own life. Ultimately, taking on this and being commissioned to go into the church and make disciples of all nations. And then I go into the churches and I adopt this new life as a priest in the church. And about 8 years later, let's see if I'm getting, 8 years later, Bishop Conlon goes, "Oh, Father Cote, I think we'll make you a pastor this year." And I find myself, after 8 years, going from being an associate pastor to a pastor at a smaller parish than this, and once again, kind of going through this whole new process, experiencing something new in my life caused me to go through a new kind of conversion, a new kind of confession, a new kind of communion. And so it continually happens in our lives. So what are our next steps? What are our next steps with all of this? My genuine hope is that some of you have already read his letter. I'm not going to do the cheesy raising of hands. I don't want to group shame people who haven't read it yet. But I do hope you read his letter. If you haven't read Bishop Hicks's letter yet, get online, go to the diocesan website, you'll find it there, and read it for yourself. Take it in. There's even at the very end of that letter, there's a nice little section that they included in this letter with reflection questions. So you can even kind of go back and you can kind of see how this letter has washed over your own heart. And they're questions about your own faith. They're questions about how God is working in your life. So I would challenge you to read that letter. That's the next step if you haven't done it already. Then, throughout the next year, from the launch of this letter to about this time next year, we're going to continue to kind of reapproach these topics, you know. In fact, maybe I'll give a series of homilies where I approach each one of these parts individually, talk about it a little bit more in depth, what it looks like, how it feels, what we should look for in our own lives to make it happen if you feel like it hasn't happened yet. But ultimately, this process is leading us into the direction of that last C of commission, to become an evangelizing church, to become a church where everyone is on board with doing the work of making disciples of all nations, of evangelizing our friends and neighbors. You know, evangelization isn't like it was, say, 100 or 200 years ago, when to reach new people, you literally had to get on an airplane and you had to fly to a foreign country and you had to find some community out in the jungle somewhere to bring them the good news because they've never heard it before. We don't even need to do that anymore. In fact, most of the people that need to be reached probably live next door to you. They might even live in the same house. They might work with you. They might go to the same school as you. They might go to the same health club you go to. They're right there. You don't have to go far to find them. But how do we reach out to them? Personally, on my own personal level of what I'm going to be doing throughout this year too, is I am going to be meeting in with a small group of folks from our own parish who are going to pray with me, and we're going to spend an entire year together in prayer to deepen our own faith, to kind of hopefully go through this series of C's that the bishop is presenting to us ourselves, so that at the end of a year, I have 12 disciples with me who are ready to just absolutely rock evangelization in our church. And then we'll grow it from there. We'll begin to develop ideas and programs and events, practical things that anyone can get involved in, practical things that will engage us first in our own faith. My goal is, let's get everyone at St. Scholastica on fire for Christ. Let's get them through those first 3 C's, so that by the time we get through those first 3 C's, we are ready for the 4th. We are ready for that going out into the world to make disciples. I don't expect this to be some quick thing. We read some bishop's letter, and then we ham-handedly throw something together, and in a couple weeks we're doing something. Not going to do it that way. I want to take the slow, very deliberate, thoughtful approach. And my goal is that maybe in 10 years or 11, when they say, Father Mark, you've been at Scholastica too long, you got to go somewhere else now. My goal is that whoever the receiving pastor is in 10 and 11 years, that what I am gifting them is a church that does evangelization, that's already doing it. I want that to be my gift to the next pastor of St. Scholastica. And so this is my big ask. My big ask is that first, that you read the bishop's letter. You have to read his letter. It has to start there. It's not hard. I said this last week. His letter took me about 15 minutes to absorb. I've already read it 3 times now. I'm going to, this week, I intend on reading it a 4th time. I also even went back and since it's referenced in his letter, I even went back and read Bishop Conlin's letter from 2017, which is also you can also find through a Google search I found. I was able to find that. And his letter is very nice. Bishop Conlin actually gives sort of a historical perspective of comparing where the Joliet Diocese was back in the 1960s to where it was in 2017. 2017 is when he wrote that letter. So that's a good read too. That one will take you longer, however. I will just warn you. Bishop Conlin's old letter is very lengthy, but it's if you like history and you like to learn about where our diocese has been, I can't think of a better document than what Bishop Conlin wrote in 2017. But the one I really want you to read is Bishop Hicks' letter, Make. That's the title of it. It'll take you 15 minutes. Let it change your heart. I felt it changing my own heart as I read it the first time. I went to that conference that they sent us to with sort of this fear of, oh no, the diocese is going to make me do something. They're going to give me a project to do. I'm going to have to change everything that I'm thinking about and what I want to do. And my fears came true, except not in a bad way, because I realized what he was offering us was really good. It's exactly what I want to do with my parish. I want us to grow in our relationship. I want us so that after those 10 years or 11 years together, whatever I get here from here on out, I want at the end for all of us to be able to stand up and simply say, and absolutely mean it 100%, I love Jesus.